This car was different. It wasn't just biology, it was an archive.
Rows of what looked like overhead luggage racks were filled with pulsating, fleshy sacks. As Ethan steadied himself, he saw a briefcase, the leather one the man in the charcoal suit had been carrying, half submerged in the ceiling's tissue. Below it, the man's face was visible through a thin, milky film in the wall. He wasn't dead. His eyes were wide, darting frantically behind the membrane, but his mouth was fused shut, his skin blending seamlessly into the gray, veined walls of the subway car. "I have to get out! I have to get out!" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. He reached for the emergency brake, but the handle was gone, replaced by a dangling vestigial limb that twitched when he approached. He realized then that he was the only thing on this train with a heartbeat that didn't match the engine's. He was a foreign body, a germ. The white-tiled walls of the tunnel outside, if that's what they still were, weren't passing by. They were being secreted. The train was a needle, and it was sowing a new reality through the bedrock of Manhattan. Ethan stumbled toward the front of the car, driven by a primal need to see the conductor. He needed to see the face of the thing driving this nightmare. He tore through another layer of weeping membrane, his fingernails raw and bleeding, and burst into the operator's cab. There was no control panel. There were no levers. In the center of the small, cramped space sat a mass of gray matter, a literal grain the size of a furnace, suspended by thick, arterial cables that pulsed with stolen electricity. And embedded in the center of that brain, like a fly in amber, was a transit map of New York City. But it was wrong. The lines weren't routes, they were veins. The stations weren't destinations, they were organs. Ethan's gaze fell to the floor of the cab. There, amidst the tangled mess of nerves and gristle, lay a pile of discarded items: wallets, wedding rings, pacifiers, and thousands of subway metro cards, all stripped of their magnetic strips. He picked up a discarded wallet. It was his. He opened it with trembling hands. The ID inside didn't show his face. It showed a blank, featureless oval of flesh. He touched his own face, and for a terrifying second, he couldn't find his nose. His skin felt smooth, like wax left too long in the sun. He looked back at the giant brain, and the map on its surface shifted. A new line was forming, a deep, bruised purple, originating from Union Square and heading toward a void where the map simply ended. He wasn't a passenger who had missed his stop. He was the final ingredient. The train wasn't taking him to a destination. It was waiting for his identity to dissolve completely so it could finally arrive. Suddenly, the train screeched, a sound of 1,000 dying cellos. The bioluminescent walls turned a violent, angry red. The floor beneath him began to tilt, not downward into a tunnel, but upward, as if the train were trying to vomit him into a higher dimension. Through the front window, which was nothing more than a giant, dilated pupil, Ethan saw the skyscrapers of New York, but they weren't made of steel and glass. They were giant, calcified teeth, and the subway tunnel was a throat that was finally starting to swallow. Ethan's fingers didn't just slip on the glass, they sank. The pupil of the lead car wasn't cold like industrial acrylic. It was warm, coated in a viscous saline film that stung his eyes. Outside, if outside was even a word that applied anymore, the skyline of Manhattan was no longer a triumph of human engineering. The Chrysler Building and the Freedom Tower were jagged, ivory-colored molars, miles high, and caked in a gray, calcified tartar of dead civilizations. The sky was a bruised, pulsating purple, a soft palette of clouds that groaned with every intake of the city's breath. "Not real," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. "I'm in the IRT. I'm on the 4 train. I'm going home to Brooklyn. I have a cat. I have a rent check due on the 1st. He repeated these details like a litany, a desperate anchor to a world that was being ground into pulp by the reality outside the window. But as he looked down at his own hands, the anchors began to slip. His knuckles were turning a pale, translucent yellow. His veins didn't pulse with the red urgency of blood, but with a slow, rhythmic flicker of bioluminescence, the same sickly light that filled the car. The train lurched, a violent peristaltic heave that threw him against the wall. This time the wall didn't just yield, it sighed, a long, drawn-out exhalation of hot, humid air that smelled of ancient peat and copper. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind fracturing. He reached into his pocket for his phone, a piece of plastic and silicone that represented everything logical and modern. He pulled it out, but it wasn't a phone anymore. It was a smooth, rectangular piece of obsidian-like bone, its surface etched with swirling microscopic fractals that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. He dropped it. It didn't clatter. It merged into the floor with a wet, slurping sound. "Who am I?" he asked the empty car. Suddenly, he wasn't alone. In the seat across from him, a man appeared. He hadn't walked through the door, which was now a sealed seam of scar tissue, and he hadn't been there a second ago. He was a businessman, or the memory of one. He wore a pinstripe suit that seemed to be melting into his skin. He sat perfectly still, holding a briefcase made of what looked like dried skin. "The 502 from Grand Central is running late," the man said. His voice didn't come from his mouth, it vibrated out of his chest cavity. Ethan backed away, his spine hitting the front window. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The man turned his head. His eyes were gone, replaced by the same dilated pupils that served as the train's windows. "I am being removed," the man said calmly. "The system is efficient. It doesn't waste energy on doors. If you are not part of the digestion, you are the waste. And if you are not waste, you are the fuel." Before Ethan could scream, the man began to thin. It wasn't a fade, it was as if an invisible hand was erasing him with a cosmic sponge. His legs became ribbons of gray smoke, his torso stretched into a thin, translucent film, and then, with a sound like a single sharp intake of breath, he was gone. He wasn't in the next car, he wasn't on the tracks, he was just subtracted from the sum of the world. "One passenger removed," a voice announced over the intercom, not the distorted mechanical voice from before, but Ethan's own voice layered 1,000 times over itself in a dissonant choir. Ethan's legs gave out. He fell to his knees on the floor, which now felt like the tongue of a god. He looked at the subway map above the door. The familiar stops, Union Square, Canal Street, Fulton, were gone. In their place were symbols he couldn't name, but understood with a terrifying, primal clarity. The next stop wasn't a place, it was a state of being. It was labeled the dissolution of individuality. He clawed at his chest, trying to feel his heart, but the rhythm was wrong. It was synced with the train. Every time the wheels ground against the organic tracks, his chest tightened. He tried to remember his mother's name. Sarah? Sandra? The name felt like sand in his mouth, dry and meaningless. He tried to remember his face, but when he looked into the darkened reflection of the eye window, he saw only a blur of shifting features, a face that was trying to decide if it was still human or if it was becoming part of the upholstery. "I'm Ethan Cole," he screamed, his voice now a wet gurgle. "I live at 412 Berkeley Place. I work in marketing. I like the smell of rain on hot asphalt."
But the memories were being eaten. He could feel them being pulled out of his brain like silk threads from a loom. The memory of his first bike ride, gone. The memory of his first heartbreak, digested. The memory of the sun, that bright yellow thing that used to exist in the sky, was being replaced by the cold, internal glow of the throat he was sliding down. He wasn't a passenger anymore. He was a pathogen, a piece of foreign matter that the city's grand subterranean anatomy had accidentally swallowed, and now the antibodies of reality were coming to deal with him. The train began to speed up. The teeth of the skyscrapers outside began to gnash, a thunderous sound that vibrated through Ethan's very marrow. He looked down at his hands again. They were gone. In their place were two pale, shimmering, translucent stumps that were already beginning to fuse with the floor of the car. "Wait," he begged, though he no longer knew who he was begging. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I missed the earlier train. This is a mistake." But the train didn't care about mistakes. The New York that Ethan knew was just a skin, a thin, decorative layer of grime and light stretched over this, the true mechanism of the world. A vast, hungry gut that processed souls into the gray, humdrum energy that kept the lights of Broadway burning. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his head, as if a needle was being driven into his third eye. A flood of images that weren't his own crashed into his mind. A woman in a 1920s flapper dress weeping on this same train. A Dutch sailor staring in horror at the same ivory teeth 300 years ago. A creature from 1,000,000,000 years in the future mourning the death of a son. They were all here. They were all part of the train now. They were the seats. They were the straps. They were the very air he was struggling to breathe. "Please," he whimpered, his identity now a flickering candle in a hurricane. "Just let me be nothing. Don't make me part of this." The car began to tilt upward. The throat was swallowing. Ethan felt the weight of the entire city, the millions of tons of stone, the millions of lives, the sheer crushing reality of New York pressing down on his chest. He wasn't Ethan Cole anymore. He was a sensation. He was a flicker of fear. He was a passenger waiting to be removed. As the car entered the dark, wet gullet of the final tunnel, the bioluminescence reached a blinding, searing white. Ethan felt his consciousness stretch, thin, and snap. He wasn't in his body anymore. He was the car. He felt the friction on the tracks like a burn on his skin. He felt the passengers inside him, the ghosts of the removed, like a dull ache in his stomach. And then the voice, his voice, came over the intercom one last time, echoing through the hollow chambers of his new, vast, and terrifying self. "Next stop, the source. Please mind the gap between your soul and the void." The intercom's voice didn't just fade, it curdled. It left a metallic, iron-rich aftertaste on Ethan's tongue, a flavor like sucking on a penny while drowning. "Next stop, the source." The words echoed not in the air, but inside the marrow of his shins. Ethan didn't scream. He couldn't. His jaw had begun to fuse with his collarbone, the skin knitting together in a seamless, translucent web of New York's signature grime and something ancient, something that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic throb. The train didn't slow down for the station. The station expanded to swallow the train. As they breached the threshold of what should have been Grand Central, the pupil at the front of the car dilated until the walls were nothing but a thin, vibrating membrane. Outside, the familiar marble and gold of the terminal were gone, replaced by a vaulted cathedral of calcified ribs. The pillars weren't stone, they were colossal, petrified femoral bones, rising miles into a dark, humid sky where stars were replaced by the blinking, rhythmic lights of millions of unblinking human eyes. He watched the passengers, or what remained of them. They weren't gone. He saw Mrs. Gable, the woman from 14th Street who had vanished 3 cars ago. She wasn't standing on a platform. She was the platform. Her torso had been elongated, stretched across a mile of track, her face repeated 1,000 times in the grain of the floorboards, her eyes serving as the safety lights that warned of an approaching train. Every passenger who had ever disembarked was merely being redistributed into the infrastructure of the city. The subway wasn't a transit system, it was a digestive tract, and the city above was the apex predator that it fed. He felt a sudden sharp tug at his navel. It wasn't pain, it was the sensation of being unspooled like a cheap silk thread. His memories began to leak out of his ears in the form of a thick silvery fluid. He saw his 5th birthday, the smell of his mother's perfume, the rain on his wedding day, all of it pouring onto the floor of the car, where it was greedily lapped up by the floor's thirsty, microscopic cilia. The train was processing him, indexing his life to determine where he would best serve the great machine. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, though his mouth was now a mere slit. "I missed the last real train." A sound like a million grinding gears answered him. It was a laugh, or perhaps just the tectonic shift of the city's heart. He realized then the horrific nature of his error. This wasn't the last train for the night. This was the last train for the era. The city was closing its eyes, preparing to hibernate, and it needed one final piece of foreign matter to seal the gates. His legs began to melt, the denim of his jeans merging with the floor's keratin-like surface. He was becoming the seat. He was becoming the pole. No, he was becoming the very air that the future would breathe. He looked out through the giant pupil one last time and saw the skyscrapers of Manhattan lean inward. They weren't buildings. They were the teeth of a giant cosmic trap that had finally snapped shut. The revelation hit him with the weight of a collapsing star. Mankind hadn't built New York. New York had grown mankind as a gardener grows a crop, waiting for the population to reach a critical mass of despair and density. The subways were the roots, and tonight the harvest was complete. As his consciousness fractured, Ethan saw the void beyond the source. It wasn't empty. It was filled with other cities, London, Tokyo, Paris, each one a different species of the same cosmic parasite, all of them pulsing in a synchronized, hungry heartbeat. He felt his individual self vanish, replaced by the collective thrum of the 4, 5, and 6 lines. He wasn't Ethan Cole anymore. He was the 2:14 a.m. local. He was the screech of metal on metal. He was the darkness between stations. His final thought, before his mind was completely overwritten by the transit map, was a fleeting image of the next passenger. Somewhere, in a world that hadn't ended yet, a man was checking his watch, waiting for a train that would never arrive, unaware that he was standing inside the mouth of a god. The doors of the train didn't open, they dissolved, and as Ethan became the void, he realized the gap they told him to mind wasn't a distance between the platform and the car, it was the space where his soul used to be.